So, in other classes I teach, I spend months with this idea. Y'all get 5 minutes. But what I do is I say, well, we can consider how an animal cell is composed of a relatively impermeable phospholipid bilayer. Whew, that's a lot of words to string in a sentence. So, okay, so animal cells are composed of a relatively impermeable. What does that mean? Only some things can go through. Phospholipid bilayer. Well, it's composed, you have 2 layers that are facing each other, composed of phosphate and lipid. And lipids, of course, hate water, so they're in the center, and your cell membrane is composed of these phospholipid bilayers all the way around. That's kind of cool. And it's somewhat permeable, so there are little channels and little holes throughout this. Okay, that's cool. We got little channels. It's relatively impermeable. There are also going to be little receptors on the cell surface, right? So there are going to be receptors. Well, this is actually fairly easy to grasp. If a cell is going to be sensitive to a substance, it needs to have a receptor, right? That is, if I want the cell to be sensitive to caffeine, it needs to have the appropriate receptor. That's really a simple idea. But also, you can go, well, the more receptors it had, what would you predict? What?
The more sensitive it is.
The more sensitive it is, right? So you would say, in our terminology, there's a positive correlation between the number of receptors, so if I were to have down here, the number of receptors and sensitivity. And when I said the presence or absence of the receptors, I just used Mill's method of difference. So that's what's going on here. That's kind of cool. But this is not where we get. This is not the end of this story, right? Because if you, let me give you some examples in the real world. Since we had sharks already, sharks have a special sensory thing called the ampullae of Lorenzini, right here, and we don't have these. We can't do what a shark can do. Anyone know what these ampullae do for the shark? Electric. They allow the shark to detect electricity in the water. What?
That's what that is. It's
Balling. So we have to go, man, that is awesome. Wouldn't it be cool if you could do this? You're swimming along in the water and you're like, somewhere there's electricity. I'll give you a more mundane example. Mundane, that is, it's us. In other classes you've learned the way that you see colors, you have 3 kinds of photoreceptors. Not 3 kinds of photoreceptors. 3 kinds of cones. You also have rods in your eyes as well. And if you have all 3 kinds of photoreceptors, when you look at something, you can see this rainbow of colors. Well, the cellular dependence theory predicts if you lack one of those kinds of cells that is sensitive to that wavelength, what would happen? You would have a form of color blindness. And just in case you're curious, this is what one form of color blindness looks like. They can still see the objects, they just can't distinguish the different colors. This is cellular dependence. All right, so that, in case you're curious, it's that kind of color blindness. So the cellular dependence idea is a tremendously powerful idea. I said it can help you explain what's going on in your brain. How would that work? Well, as it turns out, cells that do similar things tend to stick together. They don't have to, but they do. So cells that do similar things tend to work together. And what might you predict? The more of these cells that you have, any prediction you might make? So instead of having 5, what?
The more receptive you are.
The more receptive you would be. You could also notice that. You could also say there's a positive correlation between the number of cells that you have devoted to something and the organism's sensitivity to it, the importance to the organism. This is a powerful idea. It is, I think, one of the most powerful ideas in all of modern neurobiology, to go start with a single cell and see where I can go. Well, how does this help us understand the brain? Well, let's go into the spinal cord. Well, okay, this is your nice little spinal cord here. Here is the front ventral towards the stomach. Here's the back dorsal. It doesn't look like much, but there's already some specialization that's occurring in the spinal cord. At a gross level, which part of the spinal cord takes care of the moving stuff? You remember their neurobiology? This has only been known for 200 years for what it's worth, y'all. It's not that bad. I see stuff only known for 200 years like we just learned it. You know, people are like, did you read the latest issue of Science? I'm like, from what year? No, motor stuff is in the front. Sensory stuff is in the back. If you've ever heard the phrase dorsal root ganglion, where all the senses come in, it's the dorsal back root collection of cell. That's what ganglion is. It's the origin, it's the root of those cells that do the sensory stuff. Whew. You can even divide it up even further, and I'm not going to test you on this. I'm only interested in the big idea here that similar functions stay together. And the relative importance of that function is correlated with its size. That is cool. This is true in the spinal cord. This is what's awesome. It's also true in the brain. Right? In other classes, you've seen the homunculus, remember, where the sensitivity that you have to a stimulus is directly correlated, positively correlated, with the size of that on the somatosensory cortex. So your face tends to be more sensitive than your back. Well, you have more neurons devoted to your face than to your back. So there's a positive correlation between number of cells and sensitivity, and there's also a positive correlation between the number of cells and the ability to manipulate, right? Lots of things devoted to your fingers, not so many with your back. This is awesome. I mean, this is like, this is even true at a micro level. If you were to go into your auditory cortex where you hear, you find there are cells devoted to very specific frequencies of sound. And, this is what's cool, there are more cells devoted to the frequencies of human voice. This is a powerful idea. The cellular dependence idea is extremely predictive. I do entire courses where I just go, let's just start with this simple idea, and then we start predicting disorders that no one's heard of, and then they have to go to the library, into the catacombs of Lister Hill, and go, I found a patient that has that disorder we predicted. This is cool. This is where we're at. Any questions about cellular dependence? All right, so we can get some other ones here. I can build on these ideas to start showing what we can call a mechanical linkage. Now, I need to define mechanical linkage. We can show that two things are rather mechanistically related to each other. That you change one, you change the other. They're mechanistically linked to each other. Like if I have a cube and I change the length of a side, I also change the volume. Like I can't change the length of a side. If that's all I do, I will also change the volume. So tight relationship. We also have a implicational relationship. And these are going to be situations where these things tend to go together. But I want you to sort of have a feel, like a real concrete feel for the difference between these two things, because this is going to allow us to understand what is meant when I say that's a strong biological predictor, and that's not strong. So I'm going to tell you what strong are and then less strong. In this, cellular dependence is a really strong predictor, right? So you can just start ruminating over things. You might go, well, humans seem to be very visual animals. I wonder what part of our brain is big. Our visual visual cortex, occipital cortex, visual cortex. But if you're a dog, what's important to you?
Your nose, your olfactory.
Your olfactory, and they have more olfactory receptors and area devoted than we do. So this is an enormously predictive idea. So any questions before I build on this? I love this. All right, you with me? All right. So now you're going to be famous in New Zealand. All right, so let's start with a very, very simple idea. So to understand what is meant by mechanical linkage, let's start with a cube. Now, I'm going to use cubes for the same reason that mathematicians use cubes. It's an idealized example. Now, we can use a small cube to represent something like a rodent, a mouse, or something, but I want to try to show some principles with the cube and then build up to go, do these principles hold true for when we apply them to animals? So if I have a cube, right, so this is just my snazzy little cube, I can compute the surface area of this cube. So this cube, each side is 1. It's a very simple cube, right? So to find the surface area of this cube, what do I do?
Add all the sides.
Yeah, well, I add the area of all the sides, right? So to find the area of a side, it's 1 times 1, right? That's how you find area, length times width. Multiply it by 6, and my surface area equals 6. All right? How do you find the volume of a cube? Well, it's a good thing we didn't have math for 12 years. That's for sure. How do you find the volume of a cube? Length times width times height. Well, that's 1 times 1 times 1, 1. So with a simple cube with side of 1, I get the following data. Have I lost anyone yet? You're going to have to follow some math. That's going to be unavoidable. Math is partially the language of science, so we have to know. All right, so what I can also do is I can compute the ratio of my surface area to my volume, and I find 6 over 1. The ratio of these two is 6. Awesome. This is not the profound part. What I'm about to do is... All right, what if I change this and I don't have 1 cube, but I put a cube next to it, which also has, you can do this out, whatever. It also also couldn't draw the turtle for art school either, so. Y'all know that commercial that says, okay, making sure, well, you called me old last hour.
That's not an old reference, though.
That's great. Floby, old reference.
Well, what year is Floby?
I don't know.
Let's be honest.
I don't know, sometime in the late 80s, early 90s? I don't know, you probably weren't even born then. So was... Alright, Alright, so let's say I have all of this should be, more recent for you. Okay, let's do the same thing for my new cube. My new cube has sides of 2. I'll just draw one big cube because I'm horrible at this. So I got my new cube, right? Its sides are 2. Alright, so what is my surface area? 2 times 2 times 6.
4.
What? 4?
No, I was doing it in my head.
Oh, sequentially in your head. 4. Run out of fingers. Alright, so what's my volume of this cube? That's surface area. What's my volume of this cube? So I got 2 times 2 times 2. Alright, so what's this ratio? What's the ratio of surface area? 3. What's happened? What's happened to this ratio?
I don't know.
A 3. What's happened? Remember, the first one was 6. What's happened now to this ratio? It's smaller.